Aries had leadership qualities. It's that fire, crackly, shiny. So that's the first thing I'm going to say about the eclipse being in Aries particularly is I would expect some of this energy, maybe not all of it, to feel like kind of a push.
I love that. I love the freshness of Aries. It's just so like beginner's mind, like it's not jaded. It's just going to go do the things.
Welcome to the Feminine Alchemy podcast, where we explore the truth about the feminine, the peaceful, the wild, and the visceral. I'm your host, J.N. Behringer, joined by my co-hosts, Julie Dean Richards and Kaylee Rose. Each week, we explore the deep mysteries of the feminine and help listeners apply them to their daily lives in a practical way. Join us to unlock the hidden wisdoms your soul has been waiting for.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Feminine Alchemy. I am Julie Dean Richards, and I am joined by my co-host, Kaylee Rose. We are here to talk about some really fascinating things going on in the sky, and we thought we would help you out because not only do we have this eclipse, the end of which is coming up on March 29th, we're right in the middle of what's called an eclipse portal right now. But we also have Venus in retrograde and Mercury in retrograde all at the same time. So to help you through this part of the year where everything seems to be retrograde and everything is eclipsed right now, we thought we would make this little mini episode for all of you to just give you some tips, tricks. And the first thing I did want to ask Kaylee as like our warm-up question, because we usually do this, is I wanted to know, is there an eclipse portal that stands out to you? Like, do you have a favorite? Do you have anything like that happened that was significant in an eclipse portal that you want to share with us?
Okay, that's a really fantastic question. And as I'm sitting here, I'm like, oh my gosh, I know that I have had some really powerful experiences during eclipse portals. But like right now, nothing is immediately coming to mind. It's like, oh, my mind just went blank. I do remember that total solar eclipse that was just such a big deal in the United States. That would have been, what was it? 2017. Anyway, I just remember that was the first time in my life I had experienced true totality, where everything around you actually changes. Like it goes dim, it gets colder, it gets quiet. And it was the most amazing experience ever. And it really gave me perspective into the energy of eclipses, particularly solar eclipses, that I hadn't really fully grasped before, because I experienced it physically, like in my actual physical environment. And I was then, from that point on, able to take that awareness into other solar eclipses, even if they were ones that I didn't even get to see at all because they were on the other side of the world, to recognize that there's a similar energy of like just a totally different perspective. Nothing looks like it used to look, and you can have amazing insights because you're seeing things you never saw before, or at least seeing things in a light that you never had before.
I love that. I think that's actually perfect for what we're talking about today. And it's also just so poignant, right? Like I remember just last year when we had the April 8th eclipse, and it was cold, right? The sun dims and all of a sudden it's like freezing. And you're like, what just happened? And so I do think, the insights you get are really big. I was going to say for mine, I think I just have this in mind because it was just the last eclipse. But it was amazing because you and I were together in Utah and we were at a retreat. It was such an experience. It was so much fun to be with you, be with all those other amazing women at the retreat. But also we were busy during that time. We went everywhere. We went up and down the whole state of Utah.
So busy.
And went to a gala. Like we did so many things. So
it was quite the experience.
That was one of my favorite eclipses, I think, because it was fun. It was a fun eclipse that we had together. There was high emotions. I think like there was a lot of intensity. There's always intensity when it comes to an eclipse. That's number one thing, I think. Like number one tip, which you all have probably been experiencing the past week and a half or so. Like there is always intensity during an eclipse, but it can also be fun and transformative, because that was really fun and transformative for us, for sure.
Yeah, it was a very healing period of time for me.
Yeah, for both of us. It was so fun, like, to be together. So that is my opening question. But right now, I guess we should just talk about eclipses a little. So most people, I shouldn't say most people, because I know there are people who listen to the podcast who don't know anything about astrology and don't keep track of this stuff. So I think we better just start with a few questions. One is, what is an eclipse portal? Like, what do you mean when you say an eclipse portal? And then if there's an eclipse every 6 months or so, why don't I see them in the sky? So let's start with that, Kaylee.
Okay, so I at least consider an eclipse portal to be from one eclipse to the next eclipse, because eclipses always happen in pairs, or sometimes they happen in threes. And the energy can start opening up before the first eclipse. There's definitely this like, ooh, things are happening kind of energy. But then the official opening is the first eclipse of the pair, or the triplets, I guess. And then depending on what type of eclipse was first and which node it happened near, which of the lunar nodes it happened near, the flavor of the eclipse portal will be a little different. And then what signs are involved will affect that as well. But in general, all eclipse portals are this period of time where the veil between this world and, I guess, the beyond tends to thin. You tend to see a lot more people either being born or dying, or both, during eclipse portals than on average other times of the year. And it's a time that can feel really intense, because usually we have wounds coming up like crazy, and we have new awarenesses coming to us, but it's intended as a period of time where we can have a quantum leap in our healing and our progression. It's almost like 18 months worth of growth gets condensed into an approximately 2-week period of time. And so, yeah, of course it feels intense. Like, it's this quantum leap of, oh, so much is shifting and so much is changing, and we can resist that. Like, we don't have to go along with it, but it's going to be not enjoyable at all if you're resisting that stretching and that growing. Whereas if you can lean into it, or at least approach it consciously, usually a person has an easier time going through the eclipse portal.
Yeah, and I think the growth is such a huge thing. And for people who don't know, an eclipse will always take place only on full moons or new moons. That's when we see the eclipse. So for this eclipse, at the beginning of the eclipse, it was a lunar eclipse. That's when it started on the full moon in Virgo. And then it will end in the new moon as we move into Aries, which is crazy. So crazy. So, just like Kaylee was talking about, you can get lots of different energies. And the reason that you don't see the eclipses, because people are like, what do you mean if there are so many eclipses? Why am I not seeing them? Like, we saw the April 8th eclipse. We saw the eclipse in 2017. Why am I not seeing these eclipses? And it's because most of the time you're not in the right part of the world. Only a portion of the world will see the eclipse. And most of the time, these eclipses are happening over the ocean. When they happen over actual land, then you usually hear about them. Like, one's going to come up in Spain, and people who are in Spain will be able to see this total eclipse. And you'll hear about it if you can see it in the totality. But most of the time, even though eclipses are happening about every 6 months, they usually take place between March and April, and then September and October time, sometimes August, depending on the eclipse. We do not see them just because they're always over the ocean. And then, like Kaylee talked about, because this was seen by the ancients as like incredibly powerful. And it was also seen as a time where royalty was born. Royalty is born under an eclipse. Big events happen when there's an eclipse. And part of that reason, and like Kaylee talked about the veil being thinner, part of the reason for that is because we're coming up on the equinoxes when this happens. Lots of times this happens around the equinox. Maybe not during, like this time in this eclipse, the equinox was during the eclipse that happened during the eclipse. It's not always that way. It's not always the fall or the spring equinox, but that time of equalization, right? It really brings the earth back into balance. And that's part of what kind of thins the veil and is kind of a checkpoint for us and creates a lot of this growth that we're going through. So we're going to talk more about this particular eclipse. And since we're on the latter half, we're going to focus on the eclipse that's coming up on March 29th. And the energy of that and what you'll be feeling this week leading up to it. But Kaylee has some great information about how do you make an eclipse useful to you, what to do, the patterns that you cannot only use just now, but you can use for future eclipse as well.
Yeah, I actually really love talking about this. And I already brought it up a little bit when I talked about my experience with a total solar eclipse in 2017. But essentially, when you have an eclipse portal, there's always going to be a solar eclipse and a lunar eclipse, but not always in that order. Sometimes it starts with a lunar eclipse. And if you are not following astronomical news or astrological news, you might be wondering, like, what do I do with this thing? What do I do with this eclipse? And so something that's really helpful to think about is like, okay, if it's a lunar eclipse, what happens during a lunar eclipse? Like what literally happens? What do you see in the sky? And if you haven't ever seen a lunar eclipse in person, you can certainly look up pictures. But what happens is that the Earth casts a shadow on the moon. So we've got the sun, and then the Earth, and then the moon. And so the moon starts to look like reddish or grayish. It's usually there's reds and browns in it. It's almost like it gets covered in blood. And if you think about that, it's almost like this blood is coming to the surface of the moon. And it's this symbolic representation of your unconscious wounds being brought to the surface so that you can be aware of them and take care of them. You can also kind of think of it as like, okay, women have a approximately monthly bleed during much of their life. You can kind of think of this as like, this is the moon's bleed. There's a releasing and there's a purifying and there's a emotional vulnerability that comes in. That's all part of the experience around a lunar eclipse.
So just so people know, that's the first half that we experienced. We experienced a lunar eclipse first this time around. Keep going, Kaylee.
This time around, yeah. Yeah. And so if you think about, okay, lunar eclipse, blood on the moon, my internal wounds are coming to the surface and internal gifts potentially, because blood is not just about wounds. And then if you think about a solar eclipse, I described that a little bit earlier, especially if you experience totality, where the moon is completely like 100% covering the sun. You get that really fascinating, like almost halo-ish, like it's really, really cool. But it's less about what the sun and the moon look like and more about what you actually experience as they're interacting with each other. And like I said, it gets dim. It gets almost like twilight, and it gets colder and it gets quieter. Like animals will be really quiet, people get quiet. And as you look around, the things that were super familiar no longer look familiar. And so there's this idea of, with the solar eclipse, you get a new perspective. You see things in a way that you couldn't before. And with that new perspective, you have a fresh view that supports you healing on a very deep level, because that new perspective gives you capacity that you didn't have previously. So if you know a solar eclipse is coming up, around that time, you know there is this energy of fresh perspective, new perspective to support my healing. If you know a lunar eclipse is coming up, around that time, you know, okay, there's unconscious wounds that are going to be coming to the surface. And then you're better prepared, regardless of what sign things are happening in, regardless of what node the eclipse is happening by. You have a very solid foundation for being able to approach the eclipse portal consciously, and also from a space of gentleness, being gentle with yourself and with other people, because it can be really hard to be a human being sometimes during eclipse portals. And so just offering that grace to yourself and to other people can go a really long way towards you having a positive experience.
100%. I agree. And that's such a beautiful perspective. And I think it's really fitting for everything that's been going on during this eclipse. Like I was like, yes, unconscious wounds, there they are, surfacing so much. And for this eclipse, the latter half of it that we're going to be talking about is, it includes Aries. We're going to experience a new moon in Aries, and that will happen on March 29th. It's a Saturday. It will happen early in the morning. So most people will be asleep when it happens. But this one we were talking about it because we were looking at, well, what's going on around it? And to the eclipse itself, like it's happening at 9 degrees of Aries, both 9 degrees exactly of Aries, which is really fascinating and uncommon. And I do want to touch on the number 9 really quick, just because that seems like a big deal. 9 is all about completion. It's all about, shedding and being ready to be reborn. It's the finishing of cycles, So it's the triple three. So it does have this kind of magnetic and almost magical quality to it, spiritual quality to it. So I'd expect a little bit of that from this particular eclipse coming up and some of those energies. The other thing though is like there's really not very much aspecting this eclipse. So it's not, what I mean by that is it's not interacting with very many other planets. There's not directly to the eclipse. That Mercury, which will also be in Aries, is too far away to be conjunct. But there are other things happening to the nodes. There are other things happening to Chiron and Black Moon Lilith and the Eve point, which we will touch on. But I think the first thing I want to say about this is Aries has an energy of like the body. It's about the self. It's about who am I? It's and a lot of places it'll be taking a place in the second house. So this is also very much about the physical world. The second house is very much tied to the physical, tied to assets, tied to your stuff. And so this idea of this being like a physical transformation is a possibility, I would say, like something about understanding something about you, who you are, your body, your stuff, what's going on with you. Aries can also be a starter, right? Aries is like, it starts the whole zodiac and it's very much like push, go, let's get out of here, cardinal sign energy. And so it definitely is this engine of like starting fresh, starting new, especially with it being a new moon, right? So like, we're starting, the cycle again. We're finishing something and completing it, and we're bursting out into something new. Aries has leadership qualities. It's that fire, crackly, shiny. So that's the first thing I'm going to say about the eclipse being in Aries particularly is I would expect some of this energy, maybe not all of it, to feel like kind of a push. Here's the push. Here we go. And to focus on yourself. You. Who are you and your physical body in the physical world?
I love that. I love the freshness of Aries. It's just so like beginner's mind, like it's not jaded. It's just going to go do the things. And it doesn't even think about like, oh, and I'll see what happens. It's just instinctive. I'm going to go do the things, which sometimes we really need. We sometimes just really need that freshness and that fearlessness.
And we're going to talk more extensively in this episode about Venus retrograde and Mercury retrograde in general. But any thoughts that you have right off the bat looking at this eclipse?
So the thing that stands out to me about this eclipse is where Chiron is. So Chiron's also in Aries, but it's far enough away from the eclipse that it's not conjunct. But Chiron is at 22, at the time of this eclipse, will be at 22 degrees Aries, and directly across from it will be Black Moon Lilith. 22 degrees of Libra. And whenever, like, I really pay attention to where Black Moon Lilith is on, like, the main moon phases, but especially on an eclipse, it's like, okay, where she's at's a big deal because she's the shadow feminine. She is the aspects of feminine energy that we have cut off or that we're afraid of. And she's also this energy of, like, I am done. I will do what I need to do. I will not be abused. I will not be messed with. She's this powerhouse energy that can be a little scary and intimidating sometimes, but is also needed. And where she's opposing that Chiron, that's just super fascinating to me. I get this sense of like, okay, we're going to have some wounds come up around whether or not we've been advocating for ourselves. And we're going to have opportunities to be mentored by those experiences, by those moments of like, am I going to stand up for myself? Am I going to blame other people for what's actually mine? Am I going to take responsibility for what's not mine? I think that's going to be a really big theme of this eclipse. And in my particular flavor of astrology, since Black Moon Lilith is opposing Chiron, that means the Eve point is conjunct Chiron, because the Eve point is always directly across from Black Moon Lilith. And the Eve point is more, will I step forward in faith? Will I take the leap into the dark, trusting that I will be held by masculine energy, whether that's men in my life or my own masculine energy or universal masculine energy, this concept of a masculine deity. Like, do they have my back? And Chiron, like conjunction with Chiron, there is this sense of like, will I allow that masculine protector energy to mentor me? And a lot of people who study astrology and also are Christian, they think of Chiron as a representation of Christ in the chart. And so there's this other element of like, okay, will I allow Christ or a Christ figure, a Christ consciousness, if you will, to intercede on my behalf, to do for me what I cannot do for myself. So this eclipse feels very almost like, will I surrender? Will I let go? And will I also fight when I need to?
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I think also just like trusting that your wounds can be healed, trusting that you can let go and evolve from these wounds. This could appear in more of an intense light if we don't choose to surrender. Some ways that this could appear would be bringing up wounds around that Eve point, which would be bringing up wounds around, I couldn't trust masculine energy. It betrayed me. I feel betrayed. I feel, I have no ability. Yes, abandoned. Yes, feeling abandoned. Feeling like, you can't trust others. You can't trust God. Maybe feeling the inability to let go. With that Black Moon Lilith opposition, maybe a little bit of a rebellion, wanting to rebel, wanting to fight.
Oh, yeah. And lashing out at other people where she's hanging out in Libra. Like, none of it's my fault. It's all everybody else's.
Yes, totally. Yes. Lashing out at other people, maybe, and pushing away and trying to hide your wounds. Like, that's the same kind of thing, saying they're other people's wounds. So just being careful about that energy as we move through this eclipse as well, because that energy will be hanging out. Chiron is not very fast. Black Moon Lilith and Eve point are not super fast. So this is an energy that will continue. So the best advice, and I put this, if anyone follows my Instagram, I did put like my tips for this eclipse. And one of the biggest ones was surrender, let go, just surrender. This eclipse is a time to surrender. So if you do that and let go, I think that energy will actually be more of a help and a healing to you, because that's what Chiron does. Exactly what Kaylee was talking about, is it is the wounded healer. So it is there to heal you and to help you. Another part of this eclipse I'd like to point out is whenever there's an eclipse, Kaylee and I were talking about this, no matter where you are in the world, whenever there's an eclipse, the part of fortune, which is the things that are lucky for us and that happen easily and smoothly, will always be conjunct the ascendant. So this is a good time to get sparks of insight, lucky things happening to you, to your body, quick thoughts of understanding. Maybe watch your dreams that night too, because you might be getting some interesting dreams, but helping you understand the self.
Hey friends, it's Julie. I'm just popping in here real quick to tell you about a very special invitation we have for you. If you have been feeling deeply called to learn more about your feminine identity, or to see what feminine power really is, or you're just loving the podcast, then Kaylee and I would love to invite you to join our community, Feminine Alchemist. Inside, we host live monthly women's circles, challenges, and Wheel of the Year celebrations. They are seriously so much fun. We have monthly workshops where we bring in experts to teach on anything from menstruation to mythology. You'll also get access to our library of courses about astrology, intuition techniques, sacred embodiment, and cyclical living. And most importantly, you'll be able to connect with women who are like-hearted and walking the same path as you. So if this sounds exciting to you, join today by clicking the link in the show notes or going to femininealchemist.com. That's alchemist spelled M-Y-S-T. Okay, back to the episode.
If you go into intention, that can be really great. And then, but the biggest thing is that North Node, I think, conjunct Venus and retrograde, conjunct Neptune. And if you're in the East, the ascendant is conjunct all of that as well. So a lot of action in the first house for me, but a lot of those coming together. What do you think about Venus and the North Node and Neptune all being together, Kaylee?
Like, I get the sense of us being divinely called and divinely supported in exploring our attachment wounds and our worthiness wounds. Like, where do we feel unworthy? Where do we feel not enough? And what have we been doing to cover that up? What excesses have we been indulging in to numb out and to hide instead of to nourish ourselves and allow ourselves to be human and feel whatever it is we need to feel, and then move on and continue to grow and develop. Because Venus retrograde definitely brings up a lot of, at least most of the time, brings up those attachment wounds and those worthiness and am I worth it wounds. And boy, howdy has it been coming up, this Venus retrograde, for me personally, for Julie personally. So if you've been experiencing a lot of like questioning, am I worthwhile? Like, am I doing enough? Am I good enough? Or any questions like that, it is the weather. It's the astrological weather supporting you and recognizing areas where you still have some room for healing and for accepting divine support and love in becoming more whole, rather than putting on a facade or cutting off parts and pieces of yourself or numbing out so that you don't have to feel that separation when you have cut something off.
Totally. Yeah. And I do want to point out, right, Venus is retrograde, but Neptune's not, which is really fascinating. So that Neptune he's kind of taking the lead in that supporting role, like Kaylee was talking about. And Neptune is dreams, fantasy, it is divine support, it is revelation. It's all that spiritual goodness, art, artistic expression, all that. So this would be a great time if you want to, to do some artistic expression, some painting, some drawing, photography, whatever is artistic to you. This is a good time for it. And I do find when Neptune and Venus are together, kind of this like amplification of like messages, especially from feminine messengers. I find I get a lot of revelation around like womanhood, the divine feminine, but also just like calls to fantasy. You might be feeling a call to fantasy on the harder part of this. There could be like an escapism piece because Neptune can do that, and wanting to escape by, we've talked about this before, filling love holes in yourself, right? And, enriching yourself with too much food, too much drink, too much watching of TV, too much sex, whatever it is. There can be that. Although the North Node is here too and conjunct as well. And that's kind of like, to me, there's a lot of, I don't want to say the word fated, because I do think we all have choices, but I will say like karmic or like destined. There's a lot of destiny working in what's going on in those pieces as well. Do you have any thoughts about that, Kaylee? Should we shift into, is there anything else we should say about this eclipse energy before we shift into, because I'm like, oh, we're drifting into Venus retrograde energy.
Yeah, we are drifting into Venus retrograde. No, I think now is a great time to transition just fully into talking about Venus retrograde.
Well, why don't you start telling us what Venus retrograde is all about? We talked about it a little bit and your thoughts too.
Okay, so just a really quick laying the foundations. Venus retrograde is when Venus appears to be moving backwards from our perspective on Earth. The planet Venus is not actually moving backwards. It's just essentially kind of this illusion, trick of the eye, I guess you could say, based on how we are moving compared to how Venus is moving, all in relation to the sun. And whenever a planet is retrograde, there is definitely this kind of like reviewing and revising energy. It feels like things do not flow in the normal way. It's like there's kind of this like stop and look inward and do it now. And it can be kind of frustrating sometimes, especially when it's a faster moving planet like Mercury, when Mercury is retrograde. But when Venus is retrograde, we look at all things related to Venus. So love, attraction, money, sense of self-worth and self-esteem, beauty, things like that. And then we kind of like revise how we approach those. Like, okay, how do I approach those? Do I want to continue to approach those that way? Is this to my benefit? Is this hurting me? During a Venus retrograde, very frequently people will feel this urge to like contact exes, like ex-spouses, ex-boyfriends or girlfriends. And it's not intended to be like, oh yeah, go hook up with your ex. It's no, review and revise what you experienced in that relationship, how you did or did not feel loved, and recognize like, was I trying to fill love holes in an unhealthy way in that relationship? And like adjust things and tweak things so that when Venus is going direct again, you can move forward much more confidently and in a more empowered way. It's not go back to your old stuff. It's look at your old stuff and see what of it was good and what of it was not good, so that you can move forward with what you want to move forward with instead of repeating the same patterns that aren't helping you. With Venus in particular, yes, there's these love holes that will sometimes come up for us where it's like, it's a worthiness issue. Like, am I worthy of love? Am I worthy of support? And when we doubt that worthiness rather than believing that we are inherently worthy, that's when we will turn to things like binge watching TV or having sex because we're chasing a feeling rather than because we're actually connecting with another human being and with ourselves, where we'll eat food and not actually even enjoy it. Like, we're just eating it because we want it to make us feel better. There's so many different ways that we engage in things that are actually really good for us when we do it intentionally. But in Venus retrograde, we're being asked, okay, what ways are you engaging in these beautiful, sensual, soul-affirming, worth-affirming things, but you're not actually doing it with intention. You're just trying to numb or hide. And that can feel incredibly tender to be confronted with that. So tender. And so once again, like, this is pretty much the key to all astrological energy is be gentle with yourself, be gentle, and just feel what you feel. It's not going to destroy you. It's just there to be witnessed and maybe to give you a message. Do you want to add to that, Julie?
Yeah, I think that you explained it so well, and that is the energy of Venus retrograde. And this, like Kaylee said, it will bring up old stuff. It's going to bring up stuff that you need to review and that you need to look at. And so that can be, just like she said, old relationships, often tons. It does not have to be romantic. Often it is, but it can also be like old friendships or old financial relationships that can come up. Old financial stuff can come up. I don't think you should just like make decisions. Like, I'm not one of the people who's like, you should never sign a contract when it's Mercury retrograde. But I would say, like, be really careful about getting into a relationship during Venus retrograde. Like, just be cautious, especially if it's an old relationship. Be careful and cautious and ask yourself, why? Why am I trying to get into this relationship? And if it's going to last, it'll last till the end, because it ends. So we should tell everyone it ends April 12th. April 12th is the end of Venus retrograde, and Mercury retrograde will end before that. It'll end April 9th, 7th. So Mercury will end before that. But just, if something's going to last, then it will last past April 12th. It'll last past April 12th. Just make it halfway through April. And the other piece of this too, thinking back about this, is just making sure, because Venus has to do a lot with stuff like physical stuff, like Kaylee was talking about as the ruler of Taurus. And so this is a time you might be reviewing, how do my clothes fit me? What do I want to wear? What is my personal style? How do I feel about my body? How do I feel about the way that I look and dress and speak, and what am I worth and my finances? And so just making sure, like Kaylee said so beautifully, just that you're being tender with yourself in those things, and making sure that you are not just trying to fill yourself up. Like, you're actually looking into this and you're not just trying to do stuff to like fill or chase some kind of feeling. I will say that in the beginning of this, Venus has been in Aries tracking back, but she will dip into Pisces, and by the eclipse, she will be in Pisces like we talked about. And Venus is amplified in Pisces because she's exalted there. So there is a little bit more support in that piece. And because she's going back into Pisces, I would imagine that the first part of Venus retrograde is going to be more focused on physical, like your body, me, who I am. And then once she dips into Pisces, it's going to be more about more ethereal things that are a little less tangible and more mental and emotional. It's kind of going to be her jam for a while, and kind of amplifying that. So again, a great time for some artistry. If you're trying to release stuff with money, this is a great time to like release emotions about your body, about money, about relationships. Like, this is a releasing time. And I do find like people also break up during Venus retrograde. Not always, but it's a releasing time. It's a time where we're letting go. And Pisces is really good for that. That kind of like everything is one, let go of it, let it down the stream dichotomy, the way we feel about things. So I would expect the second half of this to be up until April 13th. It's really going to be all about, or 12th, it's going to all be about how do I feel about these things, and like maybe even components of your own worth in your spirituality. And how does that work? What does your divine worth look like? So that's what I would have to say. I think we should move towards there, because there's another piece of this, right, that's going on as well, which we haven't even touched on, which is Mercury retrograde, baby, happening at the same time. Let's go.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Hey friends, it's Jayan here. If you have been feeling really stressed out about the world lately, you are not alone. There's been enough crazy and fear flying around the internet that even I've been knocked off my rocker sometimes. But it's times like these that I'm really grateful for the tools I have to regulate my nervous system. I developed these tools for myself when I was going through the thick of it. My babies were young and I had a ton of repressed anger. And these tools helped me through other stressful times, including negotiating my own divorce, having difficult money conversations, and of course, the whole COVID experience. And I've put all these tools in a method I call the authentic self-care method. This is different than other self-care programs because it is a framework for you to find your special sauce when it comes to self-care. And let me tell you a secret. Step 1 is not take a bath, get a haircut, or go to the gym. Step 1 is regulate your nervous system. And that's exactly what we do inside the 3-in-1 membership. This powerful program includes focused journals and meditations you can do in just a few minutes, like the fight or flight session, the hippocampus session, which rewrites your ability to see new possibilities, and the vagus nerve session, which helps you regulate your whole body in a crisis. Using these tools, members have reported feeling more empowered, more expansive, and many experienced relief from actual physical pain, all for less than $2 a day. So join the 3-in-1 membership now so you can learn these tools today. The world is not going to become less crazy. The only thing you can control is how you respond to it. The 3-in-1 membership will help you do that, so click the link in the show notes to enroll today.
This is the wildest. I don't remember, and maybe it's happened in my lifetime, but I don't remember a time where it's like 2 personal planets are retrograde and there's an eclipse portal. Like, woo! This is some intense stuff. It's like, yeah, be gentle with the humans because they are feeling so much. And the humans includes you. But before we dive into Mercury retrograde, what keeps popping into my head is I came across something on social media a couple days ago, and I don't remember exactly how it was phrased, but it was essentially like, in the transformation, you will never lose anything that truly belongs to you. And so as we're going through all of this, just that idea of like, let it go. And if it is yours, if it belongs to you, you will not lose it. You won't. And that just feels so vital to all the energy going on right now.
Deep shedding. There's a lot of shedding going on with this energy right now. So Mercury, like we talked about with Venus, when Mercury goes retrograde, again, it's reviewing, it's looking back on things, but where Venus has this bend for like relationships, value, and what's valuable to you, that's the theme. The theme of Mercury is going to be communication and travel theme. This is going to go from everything to from taking tests to signing contracts to chatting and texting your friends to social media. That is all Mercury. And so when Mercury is retrograde, it's just things tend to slow down. Technology doesn't work as well because Mercury is in charge of technology. We tend to have some issues with that. But it's this energy of like reviewing all those things. Like right now, we're doing this during retrograde. And I was like, oh no, our internet, like it was fine before we started recording. And now the internet is slower when we're recording this, of course, because it's Mercury retrograde. Letting, the whole theme of this, which is so interesting that this eclipse is ending at a 9, because this is what the 9 is all about. This is what this whole year is about. This year is actually a year 9. This whole year and this time period, especially this tight time period, is time to shed, baby. Time to shed it all. Cut it all off, let it go, slough it off, finish it up, review it. It's time to let go. And the great part of this, the lovely, lovely part, is once it's over, then we get to burst out into new energy. We get a rebirth, right? We get to rebirth out and we get that intensity. We get to take a fresh breath of air. So if you can hold on until the middle of April, you can do it. Like, you can do anything. You will be able to do it. Just hang tight and let yourself totally surrender. The 9 is all about surrender, 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 let go. And, important things, I will say, important things, of course, are going to happen during this period. This isn't, and I know everyone probably listening is like, yeah, of course it's important. It's so intense. But no, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about actual important dominoes, like actual things that matter to your life that's going to set up your destiny is going to happen during this time period. It is so important. Like your life depends on this shedding, and not to like put too fine a point on it. It's not that I'm trying to say if you don't use this time wisely, everything bad is going to happen or something like that. That's not what I'm trying to say. Important stuff is going to happen during this time, no matter what you choose to do. But I'm just letting you know that even though this is a tough time, it's so necessary, and it's actually really helping you to set up your whole destiny. Everything that you're doing, this is so vital. It's so vital. And if you come to it with this energy of it being vital and good, and like, let's just let it go and slough it off and surrender, then you will be so surprised at what manifests in your life after this. Like, you will be so surprised at all the good that's going to come through. So I just want to put that out there for people. Do you have any thoughts, Kaylee?
Yeah, I love everything that you just said. It's just this idea of like, everything is happening for us. Yes, it's intense. Yes, weird things may occur, but it is intended for our good. And it does not last forever. We will not exist in this energy. We will not exist in this energy forever. So it's a beautiful time to really feel what we haven't been allowing ourselves to feel. Coming back and touching on Mercury retrograde again, one thing that I really want to emphasize is that Mercury retrograde is like, Mercury in general is also connected to your thought process. And so now that Mercury is retrograde, it's a great time for metacognition, thinking about your thoughts and assessing like, what are the patterns in how I think? And what are the beliefs that I hold? And are they helping me? Are they tearing me down? Are they helping me move toward what I feel called to? Or are they ripping me to shreds internally? And just really like assessing, what stories am I telling myself with my thoughts? Because our brain loves to look for proof. And so if you're telling yourself one thing, your brain's going to go looking for proof of that, whether it is actually true or not. And so just being a really good steward of your own thought processes. This is an opportunity to assess that and to prune with support. There is so much energetic support for pruning those beliefs and pruning those thought processes, and at least starting the process of thinking in a new way.
I love that. I love that you brought that up, that metacognition, that thinking about how you're thinking. And this has been playing in my head. I felt like I've been getting so many like messages, so many downloads recently and promptings about some things, but look at your patterns are everything. Patterns are power. Patterns are power. If you know your pattern, you have all the power. It's all in your hands. And I think this is a great time. Mercury retrograde is such a great time to think about, what are your patterns? What patterns are you falling into? What are your thought patterns? What's happening what are your patterns when it comes to your worth? What are your patterns when it comes to how powerful you feel about yourself and the things that you're telling yourself and where you're going and how you're traveling? Like, what are your patterns? Because once you can see your pattern, you can hack your pattern. The pattern is everything. Like, you've hacked the code, you've hacked the matrix once you could do that, because you can then use your patterns for good. Something that I do, which I love, which has helped me so much in finding my patterns, is my zodiacal releasing. Like, I love it so much, but it's not the only pattern. There are so many other patterns, right? Mercury retrograde is a planetary pattern. Venus retrograde is a planetary pattern. It's helping you to find your own patterns. What are your habits? What habits are you doing? How are you thinking? But some tools that I like to use, I would recommend, and I'll have Kaylee give her recommendations because she is so great at this, but I will always recommend, if you want to learn more about the patterns of life, is numerology is such a great tool for recognizing patterns. It's so good. It's such a simple way to understand patterns and what's happening. Of course, zodiacal releasing is another really powerful tool for patterns, learning about, the planets, but of course your cycle, right? Like if you have a menstrual cycle, your menstrual cycle is such a great pattern to understand. The moon and the moon phases are such amazing patterns. They're patterns to understand. And as you understand them and learn them, you can push yourself forward. But one thing I'm going to recommend is, just like Kaylee was talking about, learning, looking at your thoughts. What are you thinking? And that metacognition piece, I would highly, highly recommend doing some journaling prompts around to help you understand your patterns. So some prompts that might be good are like, first laying out, like, what do you think about the most during your day? Like, what are the top 4 things you're thinking about? What are the top 4 things that are coming up in your social media feed for you right now? What are the top 4 things that you say when you do that? What are the top 4 podcasts that you listen to? Just like figuring out, like, where are my thoughts going all the time? And what am I spending the most time on? Like, what is my day broken up into? And that can be such a strong starter for understanding and like breaking down those thoughts and understanding your personal patterns. But what are some tools that you would recommend during this time, Kaylee?
So, Julie, you and I are definitely on the same wavelength, because I was going to talk about journaling. But I'm going to talk about it from a slightly different, perspective, a slightly different approach. So something, and I'll speak from my lived experience. I used to struggle a ton with my mental health, was constantly like alternating between severely depressed and super anxious. And it took learning that I was extremely sensitive and open to all kinds of things, all kinds of energies, to recognize like, oh, some of this isn't actually mine. Some of this is me picking up on other people's stuff and picking up on planetary movement and picking up on things that like really don't need to be in my body. And one of the things that helped me the most with that was if I was really struggling, was to write down every thought that came into my head until it felt like I was done. And you could do this with positive thoughts as well if you wanted to. Like if you're feeling really good, go journal every thought, every feeling that comes up until you're done. And then you can start to see patterns in what you write when you're feeling great and what you write when you are like tearing yourself apart mentally. And when you see those on the page, it becomes more real. And if you speak them out loud, it becomes even more real. Like if you read out the horrible thoughts that you had about yourself or the amazing feelings that you experienced, it's like your brain is suddenly like, wait a minute. I would never say this about another human being. Why am I saying it to myself? Or, wow, that's amazing. I want to feel more of that. I want to think more of that. Getting it out of you into a physical form and a vibrational form, if you're speaking it, it can really shift things massively. And it can give you this awareness of your patterns. So something that I used to resist journaling so much because I was like, oh, I got to do it every day and I got to write down everything that happened to me. And I tend to miss for days on end. And then I've got to catch everything up. And it just felt like this huge ordeal. I made it a bigger thing than it needed to be. What I do now is, at least most of the time, is like I have my journal where I'll write down downloads and revelation that I receive. And I'll write about positive experiences when it makes sense to write about them. I don't force myself to do it all the time. And then I have a burn journal, which is where I write all the horrible, awful feelings and the terrible thoughts that half the time I don't even want to admit to myself that I sometimes have those thoughts. I get them out of me and into the paper. And like my husband's been warned, like, this is the burnal. If you read this, like, that's on you because it's not true. It's just me getting the junk out, so it's not in me. And the idea is eventually you burn your burnal. But I actually like to hang on to mine to notice how my patterns are shifting. Am I saying the same horrible things to myself or having the same horrible feelings, or have they changed? Because I'm not very good at noticing progress in myself. And so it helps me to be like, oh, I have improved so much. I've let go of so many negative thought processes. and patterns. Or I can see, oh man, I'm dipping back into like this old pattern. Maybe I want to do something about that. And so like journaling can be this incredibly healing, transformational experience that's also very, very simple. And especially during this eclipse portal, Mercury retrograde, Venus retrograde, doing that kind of journaling, such a good idea. Such a good idea.
Kaylee is the queen of all these kinds of things. And I just want to say from an outside perspective, like I have seen so much of her growth with what she does. Like she grows so much, like being someone who's closer and gets to like see her transformative process is really beautiful, because it's just a testament to like this stuff really works. Like noticing your patterns, journaling, having a journal is a great idea. Being able to write down all of your thoughts, because they need to go somewhere. They've got to go somewhere. And if they don't go to a good place, then they're going to live inside your body, right? And like emotions buried alive never die, and they will, live inside of you. And that is what causes so many of our issues down the road, physical, mental, and emotional. So I think that is just beautiful. So I think wrapping up here, I will ask Kaylee for her last thoughts about this time, anything else. But I think big keynotes are, we are kind of going through this eclipse, bursting into some new Aries energy, which is great, giving you, a fresh start. But again, being careful about wounding with that black moon Lilith and the E point. And then this is a great time for creativity and support, divine support. But the big message, I think, besides that, is just surrender, let go. This is a time to shed. And all these things will end. They will end, right? April is actually quite fast coming. It feels like things just it's moving, and it's going to keep moving. So, and I think it's kind of that Mars, even though it's like, now that Mars is finally out of retrograde, like he's the only one who's not retrograded right now, basically. But now that Mars is catapulting forward, this time will feel, even though it is, just think about it as like, I don't know, a really, really fast labor that's like so intense, but it's going to end in 1 hour. Don't worry. Like you'll be pushing that baby out before you know it, even if it's like the most intense labor ever, this baby is going to come out one way or another. So time will keep moving, and you just have to hang on and just be gentle with yourself, be kind to yourself. And remember, we're here to support you. Please reach out to us if you need things. You can find us. Our socials are always listed in our websites, and anything that you need, we want to support you. But just know that you are held, you're being taken care of, and that we love you. Any last thoughts, Kaylee?
Yeah, I was just thinking about how if for whatever reason journaling feels like a lot to you right now, or it's just not something that resonates for you, something that can be really, really supportive during this time is to, when you feel intense emotion, because you will, it's pretty much guaranteed at some point during this eclipse portal, you will experience intense emotion, to allow yourself, even if it's like by yourself, you like lock your bedroom door, put on some music that feels pertinent, that feels like good or feels connected to what you're feeling, and let yourself dance, let your body move. And I'm not saying like, oh, you got to dance in this way that's like so skillful. No, you're just moving your body, intuitively moving it. If that means you're just like flapping your arms up and down like a bird, perfect. If that means you're just shaking all over the place, perfect. Like whatever movement your body wants to make to get to like hold space for that emotion and then process it, that's beautiful. It's fantastic. And it doesn't have to look or feel any particular way. You just are in the experience and in your body, and then it can be processed. Then it can be let go. But if we don't allow ourselves to actually feel the thing, if we don't hold space for the emotion, it will never process and it will never leave. It will just end up getting buried again in your system. So even though it feels scary sometimes to feel the deep grief or the rage or the sorrow or the longing or the happiness, the joy, hold space for it. Hold space for it. And that can be just intuitively moving your body.
Such wise words. Kaylee Rose is always so wise. I love bringing the somatic pieces into it, and that is so important. There are those tools, those physical tools in your body are so important. Using those somatic pieces can be so life-changing. Use your somatics, listen to your music, journal, release, let go, know that you're held, know that we love you. And we will catch you next week on another episode of Feminine Alchemy. Bye!
Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we did. Please make sure to give us a 5-star rating wherever you are listening and share with someone you know. See you next week.